Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Jacque Show. Today I get to interview one of my best friends, Johnny Elsasser. He has a book coming out, Design the Man Within, and I wanted to make sure that I got this out as quick as possible. His book's coming out May 16th. You can pre-order it right now. You could go pretty much anywhere books are sold, you can go and find it. You could go to designthemanwithin.com. We'll put all the links and things in here as well, but without further ado, we're going to dive into some specific portions of the book that I felt like it was really life-changing. You know, Johnny and I have been talking back and forth. He's been helping me. He coaches me in this area as well. And so to be able to bring something so abstract into something that could be used in everyday applications, I think this book is going to be vital in doing so. So be sure to listen to this at the end. Again, if you want to buy this book, you'll know exactly where to go to get it. But again, without further ado, here's Johnny Elsasser. All right, everybody. So I got Johnny Elsasser yet again on the podcast, and I'm so fucking pumped to do this. One, because you've supported me through so much, brother, being one of my best friends. Like, you've helped to grow me into who I am today, and now I finally get the opportunity to to try to help you as well, as you're coming out with this freaking book that is going to change so many men, probably relationships. Women should probably read this too, just tell their men how to behave and act as well. But but man, thanks for popping on the podcast again, man. I really appreciate you coming on here.
No, thank you for letting me come back on. You know, I'm sure your community is tired of hearing from me at this point. No, but it's fun times, man. I love jamming out with you. It's always a good time. And thank you for letting me come back on and jam out for your community. And hopefully we can give them some more nuggets of knowledge again.
Yeah, man. So let's talk about the book, man. So this is like a random turn of events for you, where you just randomly text me one day and you're like, bro, I'm writing a book. What inspires you to write a book?
Well, it was kind of on the docket. So like, I don't talk about it a lot, but like back when I was doing protection and when I got out of protection, I actually ended up getting like 3 degrees. And inside of all that, like one of the things I realized is that I love writing. Like I actually love writing, and I love questioning people. I love questioning like norms. I love questioning people's philosophy and studies and things like that, because I think that's how we get really dynamic in our thought process, and we become a little more critical of our thought process so we can have better understanding of things. And so when I started writing this book, it was really for a couple of reasons. The original reason was because of the fact that when I started men's work, I was handed a very esoteric, very energetic book where I had no reference point on how to get there. And I was like, if this is men's development, like shoot me now. Like this is miserable. Because I was like, I don't understand it. There's nothing in it that connects to my life. And so I was like, if this is what it's about, I can see why nobody's involved. And come to find out, as I've gotten into men's work, that book specifically, and many like it, are more kind of tied to the original men's movement back from the 70s and 80s, which was, it was dead on arrival because it never connected with the everyday man, the average dude. Yeah. And I don't come from that background. I come from the everyday man background. I grew up as a mechanic's son. I've grown up as a blue collar, hardworking individual my whole life. And so I was like, man, if I had a book that just opened the door for me from somebody, one, that I kind of respected their background, because most of these guys that are writing the books, I didn't respect their background. I'm not bashing on them right now. It's just for us men, you know how it is. We got to have respect for somebody if we're going to listen to them. And most of these guys, I like, especially from my ultra alpha background of special operations and protection, I was like, there's nothing I respect about these dudes. Sorry. Like there's nothing these guys, I'm going to be like, let me listen to you, man. Guy that's never done anything that's like super manly in his life. So I was like, all right, like I can't complain about this though, if I'm not going to solve the problem. And so for me, the best thing was, okay, let me use my desire and love for writing and challenging. Let me write and give men an open door to the path of what self-development looks like for men specifically. And let me do it in a way that shows them, one, I come from the same background as they do. I know the struggles, the confrontations internally that they have, the judgment, the criticism. I know all those things. Let me come from it in a way that I can connect with them because I've been there. And then number two, hopefully they respect my background enough to give the book a shot and to say, hey, like this guy at least has done something in his life to actually be considered in most men's view, like kind of that man, a manly man. So let me listen to him. Let me get something from this, or at least let me give him a shot. Right. So that's why I wrote the book. That was kind of the genesis of this. And, at this point, I'm hoping that it's going to be out here pretty soon on Tuesday. I'm not sure when you'll release this, but May 16th will be officially published. So people will start getting the books. And that's a scary thought, because now it is like on display, like people, it's not just my friends and family who have it anymore. It's like real people. It's the people who I want to impact. So hopefully it conveys that message. Hopefully it does relate to them. And that's where it came from.
Yeah. And I think one of the cool things too is that, it's not just your opinion of things. You've gone through your own shit. You've had your own experiences. But one of the things that maybe people don't know about you is you're an avid reader. So you're constantly grabbing and pulling and reading literature on all these topics. And even in the book, like, you're able to pull and talk about, hey, this is what some people may think. You have it broken down into certain bullet points. And so you're able to kind of do like a meta analysis of what was out there and formulate that into kind of like your own approach to what is masculinity.
Yeah, I do my best to do that, because I haven't read everything, and I make that, I want to be very clear about that. I've read a lot, but I haven't read everything. And when we read information, we digest it and process it through our own lens, right? And so am I going to be 100% correct on some of these things? Maybe, maybe not. Like, I don't know. It just depends on your perception as well. And then, your challenging of my philosophies, right? But I try to take a look at what we've been given through some form of analysis, some form of scientific research. I try to take what we've been given and then utilize that to influence how we look at the world as men. And, from masculinity, from epigenetics, from neuroscience, I try to incorporate all of those things so that we can get a full picture of what it's like, one, to be a fucking human, right? Like, humans, we're very complex. And then the other thing is what it's like to incorporate that process with, like, specifically what it is to be a man in today and the things that we go through. And, I find a lot of those things that I've read on and learned on, I wasn't open to reading those things back when I started my own journey, like my men's development journey, my personal journey. I wasn't really. And so I wanted to bring those elements, very rudimentary. Like, I did not go super in depth on these. I gave people enough expansion into them that they could be like, oh, let me go read Dr. Bruce Lipton. Let me go read Dr. Joe Dispenza. Like, I bring them in as some form of validity to what I'm trying to talk about, but in no way, shape, or form is an in-depth discussion on the science behind what they have developed, right? So I love that you appreciate that, and I would have appreciated that too, being somebody when I started my journey, if that was given to me, because the things that I had given to me, the spiritual and esoteric stuff and energetic stuff, it's not tangible. And in reality, it's all subjective. There's no study and data to it, but there is data to a lot of the things that I've brought into this book to give guys some more tangibility to it.
And you do mention that in the book too, where I think it was, you were talking about epigenetics, and you're like, and I'm not a doctor on this topic or whatever. Like, you're like, hey, this is how I've been able to kind of absorb this information. This is kind of what I grasp from it. Go read, go do more research on your own. But this is my interpretation of it, which is awesome. And you read a lot of books, and a lot of guys, especially in the masculinity, they have this ego about them where it's like, just listen to me and that's it. And you're like, listen, but there's also a bunch of other resources, and here's where I grab my information from. So I really appreciated that in the book as well.
Yeah. I felt like that's important. I want to make sure that if I'm giving off information, I give the resources for the dominating theme, because I want people, it's kind of like, this, one of my favorite podcasters is Sean Stevenson, the Model Health Show. And Sean Stevenson does that. He literally will give you his breakdown of stuff, but then he cites everything. And I think that is the most important thing, because when you give people that citation, you allow them to then go have their own evaluation and interpretation and perspective. And I don't want to be like, you've talked about this on your podcast, but in today's world, I'm not sitting here trying to groom you motherfuckers. Like, I want you to actually critically think, because you already have enough psyops being done on you. I'm not trying to do that. I want you to like take my information, but then go question it and see how it fits into maybe your lens, right? And like actually read the information I'm reading. And I appreciate that about you, that you like that. And I just I wanted that to be real. Like, I don't want to put myself as somebody who knows all, because I'm always evolving too. My shit changes. Yeah. My philosophies change because I question myself. I question other people's stuff. And if we're not doing that, we're not evolving.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Let's talk. So I had some bullet points that I pulled from the book. And so it was one of those things where it's always good to take the intangible and make it tangible. But I wanted to go into, so there's 4, and I pull this out of here. So there's 4 structural pieces that which we tend to attach to as men in our development and refer to them as the Fantastic Four. Okay. So the essentialist, the positivist, the normative approach, and the semiotic approach. So can you give us a little bit of insight into what those are?
Yeah. So one of the things I did early on was I dove into the sociological research within masculinity, which most of the men coaches and men's leaders have not done. There's only probably two other ones that I know of that have actually read some of the same things I have. And I thought that was very important. I think this is an important piece. Now, I think the important discussion here is we have to understand that it's also a transgender woman who wrote all these things. So there's a certain lens around it. And so we have to understand that lens, right? And then we also have to understand that she is actually the preeminent writer of sociological inflection of masculinity on society since the 1970s. So there is also that. She's actually one of the ones that's gone out and done the research. And so, like I said, there's a little bit of a lens distortion for me that I question when I read her stuff. But then there's also things I pulled out that I thought were very powerful. And I think they have shaped society. And I think they're important for us to know. So those Fantastic Four, I can't take credit for them. Those are actually from Raewyn Connell's book, her book on hegemonic masculinity. And she talks about those things, but they're very important because we can see ourselves in all of them. And I've used them in my teachings and my coachings, because as we break down the infrastructure of all of us in masculinity, I can look at all 4 of those and find either one or all 4 of them in how I see masculinity today, and then relate them to the certain people that I looked at, or certain things I looked at now or looked at growing up as like what shaped me to be a man. Like, for instance, being in shape, right? Like, this is a big one for me. I grew up just like you and probably a lot of the listeners. I grew up watching Arnold Schwarzenegger. I grew up watching Sylvester Stallone and Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme, and these dudes that were like shredded and standing up for injustice, and then also getting the chick, like also getting the hot chick and like all that. And I was like, okay, so like a dude's got to be in shape. He's got to be jacked, right? Like, it's got to be part of who he is. So I took that as who I was. I started working out at 16 years old, but as this relates to those Fantastic Four, that follows the normative theory. And the normative theory looks at, identifies masculinity within like the silver screen, movies, TV shows, magazines, things like that. And then society gives a certain definition of masculinity within those people or characters, right? And so what happens is they call this the normative theory because it becomes this normal aspect of masculinity. But what we fail to realize when we're watching those is it's everything but normal, because the fact that it's a groomed environment specific to make that storyline enticing. And then that character, all the traits of that character fit for that storyline, right? But in real life, most of life is boring as fuck. Like, it is so like, I love Scrubs. I love the show Scrubs. And it was very cool because like they had real doctors that informed on Scrubs, and Scrubs is all about the average daily life of a doctor just being super boring. Like, it's just not like this. It's not like Grey's Anatomy. It's not like ER. It's like or literally, House, or House. It's like mundane, boring shit. Right. And so I just look at this and it's like life in general is not like these movies. And so when we look at the normative theory, what happened was a lot of us were shaped in our view of masculinity, for instance, in that particular aspect. And if we related and gave value to those characters, we started to shape our versions of masculinity around that. And I know I did. And I know many men that I've interviewed, many men that I've spoken with say, yeah, normative fits me too. It's not like shameful. It's just like, yeah, we gave value to these guys, and then we're like, okay, like I want to be like that. I want to get the girls, the hot girls too. So I'm going to go work out all the time, right? Like I'm going to get in shape. So like we started to create that. And it's the same thing when we start to look down the path of these four, you start to talk about the positivist, and the positivist is taking the average within their own environment. So they're looking at everybody within their own environment. And if 6 out of 10 men do this, then they say, okay, that's masculine, right? So if the predominant theme is that more men than not do a specific thing, then they start to say, okay, that's what a man does. And then they start classifying those traits that they see majority of men do in their specific environment, right? If they see majority of them do it, then they start to curate their masculinity around that. And then the other one was the semiotic theory. And the semiotic theory is a little different, and it's kind of a little difficult because the way it looks at it's more, I think, when we're younger, because you start to see actions and physical things specific to what you view as masculine or feminine. And so it's not necessarily being dictated by a single like person. For instance, like a woman could do something that still is classified as masculine, and you could think that that's masculine. And so the semiotic theory has got a little bit of difference because it's more from a like Bandura's social learning theory, where you're kind of reviewing what's in front of you without necessarily understanding everything and then classifying as male, female. And a lot of times it could be, a majority of the time it is like a man doing something or a woman doing something. And so like, for instance, a man is using a hammer to hit a nail, right? It's just basic. Okay. Hammering is masculine, right? And then your mom's always in the kitchen cooking, and she's predominantly the chef in the house. That becomes feminine, right? So now we start to just associate actions based on the person that's doing it, and that becomes that semiotic theory. And so when we look at these, it's just literally building blocks of like how we've come to define our versions of masculinity. And the whole point is to identify them, and this is why I do this in the book, is to identify them and then to take a look in our past and figure out where this all came from in us, and then how we operate as men today, because we do need to know where we came from. If we want to know where we want to go, we got to know kind of like where we stand, and where we stand is typically not because of us creating it. It's because we were given some things when we were in the past, and then we put those into our toolbox, and then we created the men that we are today.
I love it, man. Yes. That's I mean, that's why this book is so damn good, is because of these things. And again, you're talking about, as we're talking about this particular topic, you're giving credit where credit was due, where you got Fantastic Four from, and then you're able to kind of pull it into, knowing again where we were, and then where we are today. And a lot of it does come down to that epigenetic piece. Like, what is your perception? How do we perceive certain things around us? And that helps to curate our experience. And so this is a kind of a segue into another piece where it was like, change the unchangeable thing. So growing up, blue collar worker, you brought that up in the book and everything. And that's all you really thought that you were destined to be. And that was something that really stuck out to me, because I still have, like, I love my friends back home, but this is where they're stuck, where they're like, get the 9-to-5 job, get the good health insurance, make sure you stash money away in a 401k or whatever it is that your parents told you to do, and then retire. And then that's basically, and have kids, and that's it. And that is what you feel like you're destined to be. So speak on that. Obviously, that's not what you fell into, because you're not exactly a 9-to-5er anymore.
Well, I mean, I did though for a long time. I'm 36 now, and it took me a long time to. And like, this is like one of the things that I still like have a conflict with every single day. And that's, I want to like be very clear about like the book and about even how I coach and teach people. The whole point is the fact of like, you're never going to conquer all these things. You're just trying to gain enough tools so when they show up, you're not stuck in them, right? You're not allowing them to limit your life. Like, that's really all we're doing, because trying to think you're going to conquer some of these things that have been, you can do patterns of rewiring. Like, you can do that, as Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about. But at the end of the day, like, things are always in our lives going to crop up and then bring back old memories. They're going to bring back old mentality, and those memories and mentalities start to bring back an affinity towards certain actions and habits. Like, there's progress, but if we can catch those and change those, that's what's important. And so when we talk about change the unchangeable, it's really about bringing in these tools and realizing that like life is not fixed. Like there's not like the whole thing of like dudes being like an old dog can't learn new tricks. I want to smack the shit out. You can learn to get smacked. Like you can learn to get that, because that's like literally it pisses me off, because I'm like, no, what you're saying is you're too stubborn to want to look at life differently, or you're too stubborn to figure out something that could improve your relationship with yourself and other people, because guess what? It's going to take work. Yeah, it always is going to take work. And it's going to take, guess what? It's going to take constant work, because you're not going to conquer it. So it's going to take work every day. Now, it may take a little less work as you get better at it, where it's like instead of like applying a tool every day, it's like that tool maybe comes up once a month or once every 6 months. Like it may get a little less, but you've got to work at it. And that's what Change the Unchangeable is that like we get given these perspectives, and I was given the blue collar perspective. It was all I knew. It was all my environment. And so I only saw men in that light. And then I worked that life from like an early age. I was literally like, don't tell the freaking labor people, but like I was out working on airplanes and in cars at like 12 and 13 years old, learning trades. Like that was like what I grew up learning. And so I grew up in that environment, and I thought that was like my life. That was going to be what was written for me. And to be honest, that's the prevailing theme. Like even in high school, it's like, what job do you want to go do for 40 or 50 years? Then freaking go ahead and collect your retirement at 65, and then you get to really live, which I would love to talk to you about that, because it's so funny, because you're in enhancing and optimizing people's lives, where 65 is realistic to be healthy. But back in the day, that's not like, no, that's not like, at all. To live life at 65, you're like, I'm going to go do all these fun things. Well, yeah, when I was 30, I really wanted to go hike Mount Kilimanjaro. I ain't doing that shit at 65. Like,
yeah. 2 hip replacements, knee replacements. Yeah. Diabetic, you're on medications. Like I made it to retirement. Like, and you're going to die now because you don't have any purpose. Like it sucks. It really sucks to see.
And you're not going to do all those things you thought were fun and exciting to do that you held off because you were on this prescription. But that was my thing, is like, I had to fight a lot of that because I had done that well into my 30s. Like it's only up until like this point in my life that I've started to have the tools to be able to combat that and then overcome it. And part of that also comes with our money blocks. Like, you know, when we carry a blue collar mindset, well, guess what? Like my parents didn't put away money. There was no retirement on the horizon for them. It was literally month to month, paycheck to paycheck. That was what we lived with. And so it's like, okay, if we get given that idea of life and we just continue to move that way, well, retirement's not really even feasible. And so we're just sitting there living a life paycheck to paycheck, and we're going to have to work till we're dead anyways. But when we're given that idea of money, that money doesn't last, that money isn't abundant, that money is a fight to get every month. Well, bro, that's a pretty tough mindset to have. And that's a pretty like shitty mindset to carry, because you're always in a sympathetic nervous state. You're like, how am I going to have enough paycheck for enough month? Right. And so that is the conflict. And I carry that well into my life, even to this day. I still have to reframe certain things that I say and certain things that I think, so that I don't have that mindset anymore. Right. And so that comes with viewing epigenetics. That comes with understanding that like we can change even our genes to develop differently, to enhance our environment around us. But we have to be willing to have these conversations and to have different perspectives. And for me, carrying that old perspective of being the blue collar guy, like that kind of had to go if I wanted to learn how to live as an entrepreneur, not fighting for money every month, not living life as month to month or paycheck to paycheck, and actually looking at abundance and knowing that I can receive more. And so if we aren't willing to have that conversation, then the unchangeable is unchangeable, because you literally believe it's not going to change. And that's, you know, whether you believe you're right or wrong, you're right. Or whatever, something like that. Along those lines. You're always right. Whichever one, you're always right. And so that's very powerful. So I thought that needed to be a conversation, because I see men, and I'm sure you do too. We see a lot of men in our lives that are just stuck in that. They're stuck in that.
Yeah, I've got I have a patient who him and his wife are under care. Like I've been taking care of their family, their kids, their babies and everything. And money's always tight for them. And so he's trying to find out ways that he can get hired somewhere or go do something. But he has all of the skills to build basically anything. And I just bought that land off the grid, and I'm like, why don't you like just build some tiny homes or something? They're like, what is that? I'm like, go open your own business, go build tiny homes, research it. You've got all the skills to do it. Just go do it. And the wife was like, I don't know if he'd be willing to do that. And then he started diving into a little bit more. And then he's like, okay, they bought land. Then they're going to put a tiny home on for them. Then he's like, then I'm going to build more. We're going to rent those out for Airbnbs, and we're going to have, a constant revenue stream. And then I'll be able to build these like full time. And he goes, and I'm going to love what I do. So I'm like, yes, like we cracked the code. Like, because a lot of men suffer through anxiety and depression because I feel they're not doing what they're called to do. And so if you're just punching a clock every day, making somebody else a boatload of money, you're miserable all the time. And like you said, fighting for paycheck to paycheck means that everyone around you is a threat, because the mindset is still that if they're making more money than you, then there's like this, say there's $100 out there. If you got 100 people working, everyone's elbowing everybody to try to get a piece of that $100. And once the $100 is gone, there's nothing left. That's not true. So if we can throw away that mindset, work through it, and start to rewire those neural networks to realize that abundance is out there, you just have to start taking those steps. It's not easy, but once you do it, you start seeing everything start to fall in line. It's kind of addicting because it's awesome. You're like, oh, this is cool. Like I'm actually manifesting this stuff. This is really awesome. And it helps you move forward.
Well, and that comes also from men just being taught that martyrdom is our role in life. And that was another chapter that I discussed was a man after martyrdom, because it pisses me off. Like I more than majority of men out there have actually gone out and put my life on the line as potential sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, night in and night out for years in what I used to do. And most men are like, yeah, I'm taught to sacrifice. This is the line I always hear is, my wife and my kids are what I do everything for. Right. That's what they say. Yeah. Like, that's what I'm supposed to live for. And I'm charged with being the man of the house to provide for them. Right. So this is noble, very noble, and also idiotic, because majority of men say this. And then what do? They forget that they actually have a life to live. Mm-hmm. Right. And then what do? They hand off this shitty version of a man to their kids, who they claim they love, to their wife, who they claim they love. And then they see this disassociated dumpster fire of a dude who just is not actually being a good man, because his version of a good man is just making money to make sure they have a roof over their head and groceries. Right. And so I'm like, okay, so you became the martyr. And this is what men say, is like, they believe that they'll come home and like have a beer and watch TV and not connect with their families, or they'll feel disassociated from their families even when they get home, because they're worn out. And they're like, but I did my job, right? Because I went to work and I got up early, and then I came home and like I did my stuff to collect that paycheck, right? And I'm like, bro, you've been handed this idea of martyrdom like it makes you a good man, and it doesn't. And what I try to get guys to realize in the book is, like, as noble as you think that comment is, why don't you try living for your family? Why don't you try actually putting time into yourself? Go to the gym, start reading a book, have a positive relationship with your wife and your kids and yourself. Why don't you try being that guy? Why don't you try living and being happy and giving yourself enjoyment and showing them what it's like to be a good man in this world, and somebody who is a positive version of masculinity? Why don't you try showing that for once, And the line that I have at the end of that chapter that I really loved was that a martyr's life is shown through death or sacrifice, and a hero's life is shown through living, right? Like, that is what we're giving. And it's like, why don't you try being the hero? Like, our gift is showing what living is like, instead of it's easy to die. It's easy to lay down and sacrifice all your enjoyment. It's easy, because guess what? All you have to do is stop trying. because it's easy to just go and show up and punch a clock and get behind a computer or turn a wrench. Like, trust me, it's easy to do those things. What's hard is to say that you actually have dreams. What's hard is to say that you actually can live in happiness. What's hard is to say that, oh yeah, I do have other things I'd like to do. I'm going to actually go out and see if I can achieve those goals, to show the rest of my family that there is this continual ability to constantly strive for something greater than what you currently are in. Right. And it's like, that to me is what men should be doing if we're going to really influence, especially the next generation. But don't give me the bullshit lines of like, your family means the most to you and like that's what you do everything for. Oh, so that's what you live mediocrity for, is your family? Dope. It tells me a lot about your relationship. Thanks. Like, that's basically what you're telling me.
Yeah. And you go into, so the segue, again, all about the segues here and transitioning. So going from that, because that fits into kind of like the blue collar mindset too, is like punching the clock to sacrifice yourself, to be the martyr. And that's what we're called 100%. To do, is just sacrifice ourselves. But you give these building blocks of what you believe should be incorporated into becoming a leader. And so there's the emotional intelligence, there's leading from the front, integrity, collaboration, understanding, support, ownership, honesty, discipline, and leaders eat last. So you give some of the framework of like, okay, if we're now saying like what you've been doing up until this point is not healthy for you, it's not good for you, and your wife and kids, I guarantee you, they want more from you because they can see it's like a slow bleed that you can't see, but like somebody punctured your leg and you're just bleeding out all the time. And so every day that goes by, your light is dimmed further and further and further. And then your wife is going to get unhappy with you because you're unhappy, but you're not willing to claim that you're unhappy. And it's just this perpetuating shit show. So then you have these building blocks that you talk about, John, you talk about in the book. Can you speak a little bit more on that with how to incorporate these into your life to be a leader, to be a good husband, to be a man?
Yeah, I love this because leadership to me, I'm a firm believer that like if we look at ancestral masculinity, right, like leadership is one of the things it was required, right? Because men were the governance of the tribes because of the fact that we were bigger and stronger. And so charged with being protectors, we were also charged with being leaders. And so in that capacity, men just naturally, as societies evolved, and I go through the history of this, and so it makes a little more sense, but as societies evolve, we're just naturally looked at as leaders. Now, it doesn't mean women can't be leaders, and doesn't mean they're not great leaders in a lot of ways. It just means that we're still looked to as leaders. It still is within our pedigree as human beings to defer to men as leaders. And so typically in a household, if you look at a micro granule ecosystem, men are looked as the leaders of the households, right? And so if you're given that viewpoint of being a leader by the people that you love and who support you, then at some point you got to figure out, like, I got to show up as leader. And I talk about this in the book. Good leaders are not just given the ability to be a good leader. I've seen men who inherently embody leader energy. And so people just naturally look to them as leaders. But even those men can be shitty leaders if they don't look on how to become a good leader, if they don't look to having skills that present a good leadership role. And so I say this in the book, but I say this all the time. Guess what? Custer was a leader and he was fucking terrible. He sent his whole people to get massacred. So don't tell me that just because you're a leader, you're good. You're not. You can be Custer and you could be leading your family to the massacre by being a shitty leader. So let's look at principles that can give you the ability to be a good leader. And I make it very clear. These aren't the end all be all. This is what was important to me. This is what I learned when I was in special operations as to how to lead and how to lead effectively. And then also some of the things I've gained after the military on what I've incorporated as how you viewed as how you lead people in a normal environment too, because what I experienced in hostility is a lot different from what I experience in the everyday, normal, average work life, right? So I've taken these things and made this combination of like 10 viewpoints on how I believe, but some of the strongest ones are leading from the front, which I think is important because at that point, what you have to realize, and what was when I was a private in the military and when I became a sergeant and I was leading, I realized that if my sergeant, when I was a private, was willing to do the same work I was willing to do, I was like, oh, dude, he's badass. Like that right there is badass, because he's never going to ask me to do something I know he's not willing to do himself. And that's what lead from the front means. Never ask your kids or your wife to do something you know you're not willing to do yourself, and show them you're willing to do it.
Yep.
And that's what lead from the front means. And then leaders eat last. This is an incredibly important thing, is when you're a leader, you never eat before your team. You never eat before those who are in your ecosystem. You always eat last. And that is to signify that they are incredibly important and that you want them to be taken care of before you. And so that is one of those things where, as a leader, that is a phenomenal skill. And that gets people to want to follow you, because that's what you need as a leader. You want people to feel safe in following you, because they're going to give a better output as well. And then in that case, you become a cohesive team. Right. And so that strategy is something that I feel is incredibly important. And then I'll touch on emotional intelligence, because this is one that just, it's for men in general, like not just even being a leader, but as a man, like we got to get way better at emotional intelligence. And I go into depth on kind of emotional intelligence because there's a lot in it. But when it comes to leadership, if I can't understand where the person I'm leading is coming from, it's going to be very hard for me to actually connect with them and figure out where I can push them, how far I can push them, and when I need to let off of them. And so that's something that as leaders, we have to understand, because then when we can give that empathy, when we can give that understanding, that's when we can actually be looked at as being a leader who cares. But until we have that emotional intelligence, we're just going to predominantly look like assholes, because we're not going to understand these people. We're not going to understand where they're coming from. And they're just going to be like, oh, this guy's a dick. Like he doesn't care. Like he doesn't care that I have a life. He just looks at me as somebody who's going to move the needle forward for him. And that's not what we should be looking to them as, and especially when it comes to our family. It's like, no, the whole idea is to have a cohesive and loving family, right? At least I think.
You know, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think emotional intelligence is definitely the one where a lot of people miss the boat. And I think me personally, I feel as though, you know, our parents, grandparents, et cetera, they didn't know about the emotional intelligence piece. And then now, you know, I'll coach couples when I'm working with them, and the wife will be like, I can't ever talk to my husband about anything, and I don't have any friends, or if I do have friends, I can only talk to my friends, but my husband doesn't understand me, or basically just tells me to suck it up and deal with it. And I'm like, there's no emotional intelligence, no passion, that's not a leader in the family. It's someone who's just like, just leave me the fuck alone. I'm just going to do my job. I'm just going to work, and then I'm going to come home. You better feed me. I'm going to go to sleep, and we're going to repeat that. Mm-hmm. So this is why I really want, like, I know a lot of my patients listen to the podcast. I really want, like, if the wives are listening here, buy this book for your husband, blame it on me and say, that crazy Doc Jacque told me to give you this book. Do it. because the other thing is, it's a third party intervention, where a lot of times I notice if like wives try to mention it to their husbands have the need to be right personality, and they're like, well, it was your idea, so it wasn't my idea. You're not allowed to be right. I have to come up with that idea. Versus if you kind of dance around a little bit, say, here's a book, you read this, and then you interpret, and you can't help but be like, yeah, I'm kind of being a shitty fucking human right now. Like, maybe I need to be better. And so you start taking those steps. And one of the things that when you sent me an early edition of the book, like one of the first comments I had back to you is like, for anybody who's ever listened to Johnny speak or talk, the book is like this. It's like you're talking to Johnny. Like, it's literally like you're sitting down, having a bourbon or whatever, and just Johnny's just talking directly to you. You're like, oh, all right, it's such an easy book to read. So you're taking all the sciencey stuff and you're breaking it down to a digestible component, where once you get this book, your husband, you can read it. Like, you'll read through this incredibly fast, because it's easy to read. There's a ton of amazing information. It's going to blow your mind, and you're going to want to keep turning the pages, because like, you don't know what's on the next page, and every page is packed with such useful information. I promise you that, because I freaking have the book. I read it. Like, it's really good. So I'm speaking from experience for myself. But if I were to ask you just quick questions, who would you say needs to have this book besides everybody?
I mean, personally, I would say, like, obviously, I think I think the everyday man, the guy who thinks that he's doing the best he can to just put food on the table and keep a roof over the family's head. Like the guy who is really from the old school pedigree of like work hard and make a decent paycheck, and that's what life's about. The everyday man, I want him to really grab this book and start to read it, because I want him to realize that he can serve not only himself but his family a lot better if he just does a little bit of introspection. And from a guy who knows that mindset, from a guy who's been there before, like I can tell you right now, everything I give in the book, especially at the end, I do the work section, and I keep it specifically like 10 to 15 minutes, because God knows if I was reading the book, I didn't want to fucking do like an hour of work after every chapter. Yeah. So don't trust me. Like I don't try to do that to you guys, but I do want you to do that work, because at the end of the day, I guarantee you by the end of the book, you'll have some change in the way that you see the world or see yourself, or some change in how you objectively look at how you've dealt with your family. And you'll be like, wow, there are some places I can do a lot better. And I also have just been given the tools on how to do that. So I think, for every guy that is that blue collar, the backbone of our infrastructure and our society, the guy that's working his ass off every day, maybe hasn't thought about, like, he knows shit could be better, but like he hasn't really, like, he doesn't really resonate with most of the people out there. Like, I want that guy to grab this book. I really do.
Okay. Where can they grab it?
designthemanwithin.com is the best place they can go to grab it. From there, we link you guys over to Amazon, but you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Target, all those websites have it. Walmart, they have that as well. They have the book on there and you can get it there. Yeah. So either any of those places, but designthemanwithin.com just makes it really easy if you want to head over there.
Okay. And it's May 16th, correct?
It'll be published May 16th. So effectively, like once you buy it, it'll be shipped to you right away. As of right now, we do have pre-orders going on. And like I said, not sure when this will be out, but like if this is even the first week of this being out, I think we're going to keep the ebook at 99 cents for the first week of this being out. So you basically can get that for free. And then if you want like the tangible book, it's available as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm trying to, because I'm thinking like I gotta figure out a way to bulk send these to my patients. So I think if there's anybody else, like seriously, because if there's anybody else that owns a business and like they're trying to get like good quality men, or just trying to find happier guys, like getting this for your staff or getting it for your employees, I think would be beneficial, just to cultivate a better ecosystem within work.
Yeah, I mean, like if you're men at work, like, I mean, it's going to help you in every area of your life. I don't just say like it's going to help you with yourself. That's a huge part of it, but it's also going to help you with all of the relationships you have, from colleagues to family, to friends, to your spouse, to your kids. Like it's going to help you with all those relationships. Everything that's taught in this book is interpersonal skills. They're going to help you to be a little more understanding and objective, and start to question yourself first before you start questioning other people and playing a victim.
So are you also, because I know you're doing some book signings on, was it Friday, right? Are you still doing book signings right now, or is that the only one that you have planned currently?
Yeah, if you have anybody listening that's in the Charleston, South Carolina area, we're going to be in Mount Pleasant at the Mount Pleasant Drip Bar on May 20th, next Saturday. And we'll be doing a book signing out there from 10 to noon. So the Drip Bar is like where I go get my IVs anyways. And so like my vitamin IVs. And so they've been gracious enough to let us be out there. So that'll be out. We'll be out there doing a book signing. Then we'll probably be doing one in Fresno, California in June. And those dates, just pay attention to the website, designthemanwithin.com. We'll put book signing dates on there as well.
Okay. And I always have to have you plug these. When are your next experiences? Your wild man experiences?
The wild man experience. So right now we have something available that's in Norway. And so it's not wild man experience per se. A friend of mine and I are putting on a Viking event out of Norway with an actual Viking community. So if anybody's interested in doing that, it's for men and women. So it would be really cool if you bring your spouse, vice versa spouse. So if it's a woman listening, grab your dude. We're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff. And if it's a man, grab your wife, like come out to Norway, make it a whole thing. It's a week-long event, so you're going to be out there having a lot of great fun and experience, but you're going to learn a lot about the way of the Viking, And then there's also self-development involved in all of that as well. And that's going on in September. If anybody's interested, just DM me on Instagram at johnny.elsasser, and that's JOHNNY.ELSASSER. So that's the next experience. For everything else, head over to johnnyelsasser.com and keep an eye out for the Wild Man experiences. We're going to restart them next year. I've been focusing on a lot of different things this year between the book and then this Norway event that I wasn't really able to put all of those together and also have all the time carved out. So we'll be redoing those starting 2024. So if you're interested in that, shoot me a message, get on the email list. You'll be notified of when those are going to be opened up and you'll be able to participate in those.
Awesome, man. Again, thanks so much for carving out the time here today to talk about your book. I'm excited for what this is going to do for men out there, but thank you so much, man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you.